Hi, this is Tropical Plants at 53 degrees north. So do you have a greenhouse, a grow room, a conservatory, and do you grow tropical plants, house plants, indoor plants, call them what you will? You are then likely to be concerned about humidity and whether your plants are getting too much or not enough. Well, are we right to be concerned about humidity? Is it really such an important growth factor in the growth of our precious plants? Well, let's find out. And we are in. So, school children across the world will tell us that plants need a certain number of factors in order to thrive. Amongst those are light, water, certain nutrients, certain gases, and of course certain temperatures in order to grow well. Notice that humidity isn't on that list. So are we as houseplant growers, tropical plant growers, indoor plant growers, call it what you want, are we right to think that humidity is such an important factor in order to get our plants to thrive? Well, this is what we're going to try and find out today. And if the answer is yes, how much do they need? Could they be getting too much? Could they be getting too little? Is that the real one factor that's going to make such a difference? So let's find out. So you might notice from our list of plant needs that there are certain factors omitted from that list that we know as growers will definitely affect the growth of that plant. So if I cut off all the roots of my plants, then of course that's going to affect the growth of that plant. If my plant has an infestation of a pest or it has a certain disease, then of course that's going to affect the growth of that plant. So these are external factors and these are not to be missed. So in truth, the list of our plant needs is really not an exhaustive list. It is a list of certain needs that the plant must have in order to survive, and if it doesn't have all those, it won't survive. But we know, of course, there are other factors that will affect the growth of a plant that aren't on that list of plants needs. So it seems perfectly logical and intuitive that plants will have adapted to receiving certain amounts of humidity. We know it from our own experiences. When we're in a hot, humid place, it actually feels a lot hotter to us depending on how much humidity is in the atmosphere. And when it's really low humidity, let's say it's winter time in the UK, for example, and we've got the central heating on, you get very dry, you get thirsty. Certainly on a night time when you're sleeping overnight, I know that I usually need a glass of water in the middle of the night because my mouth gets very dry. That's a low humidity kicking in. So if it affects us, then it's likely that it's going to affect the plants as well. So let's define humidity. So for our purposes, humidity is the amount of water vapour in the atmosphere, and it's indicated as a percentage of water vapour. So for example, a high percentage of humidity, something between 80% and 100%, we would experience as being very clammy and really quite uncomfortable. A low humidity tends to be roughly below 40%, and that's again that we might notice that with it being very dry in the atmosphere, and it's quite likely to us to feel cooler when it's a lower humidity. In scientific circles there are a number of measurements for humidity, but we're concerned with the relative humidity, which is that percentage of water vapor in the atmosphere. So if we've established that high humidity and low humidity affects humans and affects how we feel, we notice the difference, then does it affect plants? Well, the answer is, of course, yes, it does. So let's talk about what excessively high humidity and excessively low humidity actually does to plants, not just house plants, any plants. So first of all, if the humidity is too high for a plant, and that is a relative term, so if a plant isn't actually adapted to high humidity, then it can do a number of things which will adversely affect its growth. So first of all, it can actually slow down the rate of transpiration. Now, transpiration is the flow of water throughout the plant, and if it gets slowed down, then that means that the plant will not take up water or nutrients into its roots because it's not removing the water from the surface of the leaves. It can't evaporate. Very similar to the feeling that we get as humans when it's in a high humid atmosphere and we can't sweat it off, so we feel much hotter. A given temperature, let's say it's 30 degrees Celsius, if it's highly humid then it will feel a lot warmer to us. If the humidity is quite low, then it won't feel quite as warm. So if the rate of transpiration is slowed down, that can also lead to rotting of the roots, and that's something that I've experienced several times in the greenhouse, as the winter time approaches. It's very, very humid. I've got the temperatures at quite a high level considering the outside temperature is usually below 5 degrees Celsius. I've got it at 18 in here, 18 degrees Celsius, and I have experienced root rot on a number of occasions because the roots won't dry out. The plant isn't in full growth, it's not sucking up all the moisture there, so what happens is the high humidity is affecting it adversely. Another adverse effect of getting high humidity for plants that aren't used to it is that your plants might be exposed to more pathogens. Of course, many factors affect this, but highly humid, especially still atmospheres, are really the ideal conditions for fungal diseases, for bacterial diseases, and for certain pests. Of course, there are certain pests that actually prefer lower humidity as well. So let's get on to too low humidity. How does that affect plants? So let's get on to excessively low humidity. If a plant isn't adapted to those particular kinds of conditions, then too low humidity can actually increase the rate of transpiration, meaning that your plant will get very thirsty. Now, you might think that you can solve that with watering, and I'm sure you can to some degree in some plants, but for the most part, what will happen is that that plant will become desiccated. It will wilt, it will become very dried out, you'll probably lose some of the leaves, and it will need more nutrients because the water is passing through the plant at a much faster rate. And just as high humidity can encourage certain pathogens, low humidity can encourage other pathogens. For example, spider might particularly enjoy low humidity environments. So as far as excessively high and excessively low humidity levels, what we can say from that is that optimal humidity levels will lead to optimal transpiration through the plants. It's worth saying that again. So optimal humidity levels will lead to optimal transpiration through the plant. If a plant can't get those optimal humidity levels, then the transpiration is going to go awry and you will get issues. So, having established that humidity does affect plants and the extremes of either end affect the plants the most, the question becomes, how much humidity does my plant need? And is my plant exhibiting signs of poor humidity levels, either too high or too low? Well, it's easy enough these days to simply Google your plant and see what kind of humidity levels it needs. You're usually given a range, and it's usually quite a broad range. However, there is a rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb is this: plants that need higher light generally need less humidity or adapted to less humidity. For example, cacti, succulents are good examples of that. They need the higher light, so they're not really that keen on higher humidity. They are perfectly adapted to low humid environments. And the opposite is true. So plants that need higher humidity are plants that are generally used to lower light levels. For example, ferns. Ferns usually live in the shade and they are used to higher humidity levels. All the other plants that you see in my greenhouse anyway are used to somewhere in between that. So what can we conclude from this? In my greenhouse at the moment I have many indoor type plants. They're all tropical plants. All of them will die without fail at 0 degrees Celsius. They're all used to much warmer temperatures than that. However, I have for the most part pretty high humidity levels in here. So does that affect my plants? Well, the answer is not really, not that much, because I don't have excessively high humidity levels all the time. I generally have fairly high humidity levels, so I tend to have somewhere between 60 and 85% humidity in general, but it's not all the time. It fluctuates. Sometimes I get lower humidity than that, and sometimes I'll have that for a week or so, but for the most part it's pretty high. So in conclusion, for my plants, it doesn't really matter that much. But what I wouldn't do is try and grow plants that are particularly adapted to the extremes. So I wouldn't try and grow succulents in here. I wouldn't try and grow cacti in here because the humidity levels are way too high for it. The main problem comes with places like temperate climates like I've got here if you're growing in the house during the winter time. Why? Well, because you have one of the excesses. You have a very low humid environment, much lower than you would generally get in a temperate climate like ours. So why is that? Well, because you have central heating on, you have radiators on, and they are well known for drying out the atmosphere, and that will be for a sustained length of time. So while the plants in my greenhouse will survive and chug along pretty well with the fluctuations that I get, they will not like is to be in a very low humidity environment for a sustained number of months. That's when you will be likely to see issues. So the question becomes, can you do anything about it? If you live in a temperate climate and you need to raise those humidity levels in your house for those houseplants that did perfectly well through summer but now are really struggling now that you've got the central heating on and the humidity is excessively low, this is what you can do about it. First of all, you can place your plants together in a group because that will help them to share whatever moisture they give off individually and create a little oasis of humidity together. You can stand your plants on a tray of water with some stones to raise up the bottom of the pot so the bottom of the pot isn't in contact with the water. That will give a little bit of humidity throughout the surrounding area. You can buy little tabletop humidifiers and foggers like mine, although a fogger like mine might raise those humidity levels a little bit too high, although if you buy a control system you can also then set it at a particular percentage, but of course we're talking about quite a lot of investment there. The little tabletop foggers are probably sufficient inside a house. Bear in mind that if you set the humidity excessively high, then that's going to have an effect on your wallpaper or the decoration, because you're going to actually end up with molds and funguses all over the place. So just be careful not to set it too high. And finally, of course, you can actually mist the leaves of your plant, but I wouldn't really recommend doing that too often because that in itself can cause fungal diseases and moles. So I would leave that as a last resort, or at the very most just do it occasionally. Don't overdo the misting of the leaves. So let's say you live in an environment where you have too much humidity and you're trying to grow plants that are used to the lower end of the humidity spectrum. What can you do about it? Well, air conditioning is pretty good for that. That will suck moisture out the air. You can buy dehumidifiers of all different sizes and price ranges, or you can put some central heating on. That usually works for us over here in the UK. And here's one that I hadn't heard of before. You can actually buy some charcoal briquettes and put them in a basket, and believe it or not, they do actually suck in the moisture. I don't know to what extent, but it might be worth a try, and of course it's really cheap. And if it doesn't work, you can always chuck them on the barbecue. So, in conclusion, does humidity matter to plants? Well, yes, of course it does matter, but probably not as much as you think it does. It's generally only the excesses, either too high or too low, that most plants would have a problem with. So remember the rule of thumb: if the plant loves light, then it's likely to be happy with lower humidity levels. If it doesn't love light, if it loves the shade, then it's generally happy with higher humidity levels. Most people will only have a problem with the lower humidity levels when they live in a temperate climate and when it's throughout the winter months and they've got the heating on. So in my greenhouse I have a whole range of plants, and they all seem to cope pretty well with the range of humidity levels that we get in this country, even though it errs on the high side. But for the house plants that I have in the house during the winter time, I will definitely try and err on the side of succulents and cacti and things that don't mind the lower humidity levels. Or I'll try some of the suggestions for increasing humidity levels for those plants that I know are happier in that kind of environment. So if you're looking for a house plant that doesn't really mind that much what the humidity is, then I suggest that you go and have a look at this video now, because these plants are perfect for it and have such a wide range of humidity levels that they are happy in. I think you'll find that they will be good for you in your house too. So for now, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.